very often people won't know that. So they'll think, well, what's happened to mum, that kind of thing. But obviously other symptoms will come with that. And again, it's about trying to understand what kind of things will trigger those kind of behaviours or change in personality.
You're listening to the Care Podcast, brought to you by Unique Senior Care. We're here to share honest, practical conversations to help you navigate care. Today we're joined by Helena Hitchcox, our Director of Operations. Helena has over 40 years' experience of helping clients and families maximise their well-being at home. We're going to equip you with some practical advice, wisdom and reassurance. Thank you for joining us, Helena. So, Helena, we're thinking in this episode about sometimes we sense that something isn't quite right. But what we don't want to do is jump to the worst conclusions and overreact.
Yeah.
So have you got any personal experience where you've maybe dealt with a situation like that?
Yeah, I have actually. My mum lived with Alzheimer's, and I remember when we started noticing the first subtle signs of her memory problems. And one of the things that I noticed, like my mum was very much, she loved family coming round to the house. She loved entertaining. She loved looking after people. And we'd come and visit because we lived away at the time. And we'd come and visit once a month. And her normal routine was come in, get your coat off, let me get the kettle on, let's make a cup of tea. And she'll have always made a cake. And it started to be, come in, let me make you a drink. And then half an hour later it'd be, oh, I haven't made that drink yet. And then it would be, what do you have? Do you have sugar? And I remember they were the first things that I started to really notice of mum's memory starting to deteriorate. And my mum was a cook for a job. She looked after a big nursing home for many years, and she was the main cook in this nursing home. And so caring for people was very much part of her life. And so I really had to think about how I approached this with her, that, it was very clear that she wasn't remembering things, and we had to deal with that separately. But how to manage that day-to-day interaction was, we had to be very subtle. So when we'd go around and visit and Mum would say, oh, let me get the kettle on, should we have a cup of tea? I'd just say, oh, yeah, let me help you. And I'd say, I can chat to you while you're putting the kettle on then. And while she was putting the kettle on, I'd be getting the cups ready. And I'd be helping her without her kind of knowing that I was doing it for her. I'd say, pass me the sugar, or you have coffee, don't you, Mum? Let's put a spoon of coffee in, that kind of thing. So it was more about doing with her rather than taking over, because people can often feel like we're taking their independence away from them. And I knew my mum would want to live at home for as long as possible. So we had to think about tips and ways of how to keep her independent while we were around her and allow her to continue to do the things that she used to like doing. So making the cake, for example. My children were younger at the time, so that afternoon, rather than that they'd all go and sit in front of the telly and I'd catch up with my mum, we'd be like, shall we make a cake with Nan? So she was still involved in all those kind of things that she really enjoyed doing and felt that we wanted her to do, and she felt that she was doing something for us then. She was still making that cake that she always baked every week, that kind of thing. So I think it's about trying to find ways to keep that and enable people to have that self-respect, maintain their dignity and their independence as much as possible. So that was when I first started, with my mum's journey with Alzheimer's, that was one of the things that I did. But I think that there are lots of subtle changes in people that sometimes we can really, really jump to conclusions that, oh gosh, we need to do something, we need to intervene, we need to, take this away from mum or dad because they can't do it anymore. And another thing that kind of comes to mind is medication. So if people are losing their memory or they're going into a bit of a physical decline, very often they'll forget to take their medication. But there's lots of things out there that can support with medication. So rather than saying, Mom, you're going to need somebody to take you, I'm going to have to come round and give you your medication every day, and I'm going to be here 4 times a day to give you your meds. There are medication prompts. There's equipment that can support people and remind people to take their medication on time, that kind of thing. So I think there's always something that we can think of before we start trying to take away independence, and we can, ensure that we aren't telling people that they can't do it anymore, because that can really have an impact on somebody's well-being, feeling that they can't do these things for themselves anymore.
Yeah. So that sensitivity and dignity that you've talked about, I'm wondering, how did you bring that into talking to your mum about her memory loss? Because at some stage you would have wanted to get her to the doctors and look at the diagnosis. So how did you approach that?
We first started with just doing the prompts and supporting and helping her, that kind of thing. And I think, as I said, I lived away at the time, but Mum had family around her that were visiting her regularly anyway. But there were a couple of incidents where she'd put herself at risk. She'd left her front door open all night, and a neighbour had alerted us to this. And then we found a pan of stew that she'd cooked under a sink with mould on it. We were with her when she found it, and she pulled it out saying, "What's this?" and got quite distressed because I think she'd remembered that she had actually put it in there. And it was about sitting down with her and saying, how do you feel? Because clearly you're upset. Clearly you're worried about the things that are happening, and how do you feel about this? And I remember my mom at that time clearly knew that she was forgetting things, and that she was putting her own self at risk, leaving her front door open, living on her own, that she could have really put herself at risk, that kind of thing. And I said, do you think we should go to the doctors, see if there's anything that we can, look at, if there's anything that he can do? And I think she knew that there was something going on with her memory. Some people might not, but at Mum's stage she did know. So she was more than willing to go along to the doctors to see if there was something they could do to support her. So then she went through the process of getting a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, which, it was a bit of a journey. But it's always, as you mentioned about sensitivity and dignity, you've got to always maintain that. You can't say, Mom, you're forgetting everything. Mom, you're not doing this, or why have you done that? Or Mom, you haven't made me that cup of tea. You usually make a cake. Why have you left the door open, Mom? That kind of thing. People become overwhelmed with those kind of responses and maybe accusatory kind of remarks, that they might feel that they're doing something wrong or that they're upsetting their family member. So you've always got to remember the person behind the symptoms and the behaviours, to support them on their journey and to make them feel that they're getting the help that they need, rather than feeling like a burden on their family.
Yeah. And sometimes when people have those kind of symptoms of confusion or memory loss, we do jump to the worst and we think it could be dementia, and then we might even avoid going for medical help. But actually often it can be other things that can look a bit like dementia. Yeah.
Very often when people suddenly have a acute confusion, it could be something like it could be a urine infection. That's a very common sign of a urine infection. So very often people won't know that, so they'll think, well, what's happened to Mum, that kind of thing. But obviously other symptoms will come with that. And again, it's about trying to understand what kind of things will trigger those kind of behaviours or change in personality, and ensuring you're getting the help at the early stage. And again, being very sensitive with that person so that they don't feel that they're the burden, or they're doing something wrong, or there's something seriously wrong with them. But, it's using that very gentle approach and always treating your loved one as you always have. Just because they're declining in their health or they've started to show the signs of ageing doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't continue to treat people the way that we always have.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo.
And thank you to everyone for listening. We hope that this episode has given you some confidence, practical advice and reassurance in navigating your own care journey. I've been Jo Cleary, your host at the Care Podcast. We hope that you'll join us next time.